So, BIP of Bizarre Interest Productions, and it's been a while since I've talked about slasher and horror. So you know what? Let's talk about a horror movie I found on Tubi that's not Carver, Varsity Blood, where a school mascot slashes teens at a pasture party in the heart of Texas from a high school where they were accidentally responsible for the death of a high schooler student and the institutionalization of another one, resulting in the final girl learning about this and trying to not only survive, but stop the killer. So, this was a low-budget slasher movie that came out in 2014. I only know about it because apparently it was put on Lifetime at one point, and it got me both curious and kind of concerned, given Lifetime movies aren't exactly great when it comes to its treatment of women, despite being supposedly women-friendly, but semantics. And when I looked around to see what people were thinking about it, I heard a lot of people hated this movie, but I usually come into things with an open mind, and honestly, I was left surprised in a mostly good way. It wasn't perfect, but it was entertaining enough. By the way, I did watch this on the first Thursday of the month, so I want to make a plot summary, but I don't want to make another 20-minute video this week, so I'll keep it brief. We get introduced to most of the characters before the person who's playing the mascot is killed. Then we see the head cheerleader Diane get killed by the killer who's now wearing the mascot outfit. We get hints about the principal's daughter dying because he low-key blames the seniors at their high school for being responsible. And there's teen drama regarding final girl Hannah dealing with her overbearing mother, who doesn't want her coming home late with the rest of the cheer and football teams, and we're going to learn why that's later. Her friends give her a half-true story about what happened with the dead cheerleader girl who she's replaced, and how her dad died in a drunk accident, with all of them planning a private party in the hills. Her friends are trying to hook her up with final boy and sweetheart Jeff. Her boyfriend just wants to screw like all the other jocks and cheerleaders, which leads to her dumping him. Two of their horny friends get murked, and the killer goes to their house, hunting them down one by one when they actually come up with a plan to escape, or go in pairs or solo to try and get some help or stop the killer one by one. Eventually, the sheriff and black girl Linda's father gets there, and he dies, exposing the killer's identity and knocking off the mask. Rick, Hannah's technical stepfather, whose son went insane because of the girl Ginny's death, and it ruined his family's name. And she learns from her mother that her mother agreed to this plan as long as Hannah was unharmed, so Hannah had a better chance of getting a cheerleading scholarship. And besides, Rick ends up turning on Hannah's mother. Then Hannah and Jeff fight Rick and are eventually able to kill him, though Rick's son Ben turns out to still be missing from the facility, according to authorities, with an end shot of a person with a knife pulling it out of a pumpkin that was in the house that they were hiding in. And that's how it ends. Basically, I thought it was decent. The acting is something that is kind of hit or miss. I feel like the major players involved, except for the killer, were good, and everyone else was either okay or just needed better direction. But I didn't hate my time watching this. While it's not the first horror mascot related movie, I feel like it's the most traditionally fitting for the slasher genre with a whodunit mystery. It is very B-roll, but it could have been worse. I don't think the characters were as bad as people in some reviews made it out to be, and I've heard people say that the more likable characters died first while the more unlikable characters came towards the end. And I don't think the characters were as bad as people say. Hannah actually has a subtle arc about being dictated by what everyone wants her to be, and when the killings start happening in her orbit, she stands up for herself and makes sure Jeff goes with her for a solution, and she does ultimately end up taking on the killer. She's not like some amazing final girl, but she's solid and gets the job done. Meanwhile, Jeff was alright, the well-meaning guy who's clearly the better match for her, and I do love when a final girl and final guy have to take on the killer together and win, because he does apologize for her to what happened when he knows the truth. My only problem with him is that he never gets to confess his feelings to her properly. Like, her friends set it up, but they even have the opportunity when they're together in order to talk about it, but they never do, which is a bit of a shame because I do like my final couples. Who was a surprise for me amongst some more likable characters was Heather. Whenever you get religious members in a cast of horror movies, or at least ones that go to church, you're mostly just seen as conservative nut jobs or jerks. Like, there's someone in your house had Katie involved in a racist and homophobic podcast, but she turned out to be pretty sweet. Well, Heather did. She just not wanted to lose her crush to her stepsister, who even thought she was better, and had a good message about just because you're a good person doesn't mean you shouldn't act upon your selfish desires for someone or something you want if it's not hurting anyone. Something Robin tries to teach Hannah and Jeff. Even when her friends start dying, she's trying to be positive and figure out a solution despite Blaine being pessimistic the whole time. And when she goes to try and get the car open, he tells her he's not opening the door back up, and she still chooses to take the risk. I'll talk about the issues I have with her death later, but while "go to hell" is pretty standard as a defiant line, it's the church girl saying that in her final moments that really endeared me to her before she died. I liked Robin enough. She was the aloof, well-meaning, experienced person in the friend group who hated the douchey behavior of their acquaintances and friends. She had remorse about Ginny's death and was actually the first to go to try to get the car. But who really surprised me was Bubba. When I saw and read the reviews, everyone had said that all the boys who were jocks were one-note misogynists, but he wasn't. He stood up for Hannah, Jeff, Linda, Heather, and his girlfriend Robin. He actually tried to fight the killer, unlike a certain person, and Hannah killing him was just an accident since she thought the killer snuck up behind her, and he spent most of the time in between them really struggling with a concussion. So I really feel bad for him in particular. He was just a really nice dude, just caught up in a really bad situation. Mike was a lot better. Like, sure, him and Tina are the alpha douches, but I really like the fact that he was the second one after Bubba to try and fight the killer, which you think wouldn't be that hard for 3 jocks, some cheerleaders, and 2 others could do. But in her defense, the killer had a bow and arrow. Tina served her role enough. A lot of good chase scenes with her. Herman was the bully mascot, and I wish we got to know a bit about him before he died. And Diane was just alpha bully number 2. Ginny, we learned enough about regarding the killer's motivations and why Ben Youngblood was institutionalized, but was serviceable as the death motivating everyone. Vicky was okay. It was cool to have 2 step-siblings in a love triangle that only happened because Peter was in the mood. And Peter's corny, but he's not a douche, though his line about wanting someone that's kind of easy instead of the girl you bring home was Still, I don't hate him. Linda was the one who I'm disappointed by because despite the sassy black woman trope, her actress did the best with the material given, like Hannah. She's also got an overprotective parent in the sheriff, but uses the gossip to push her friends to do better. But her dying first in the field was so anticlimactic, and I'll get to the reasons why later. Before I talk about the antagonists, I'll talk about the red herrings first. Ben Youngblood and Mark Youngblood, Rick's children, then the supporting characters, and Sheriff Jones and Principal Graves. Ben having a crush on Ginny and being hospitalized was fine, and I like, even though we don't see him, his effect on the plot leads everyone to consider him a suspect. People claim it was set up for a sequel that could make him the next killer, but it's been 11 years since that film ended, so I don't think that's going to happen. But with future context, I think they should have had him show up in the final battle, revealing he got his sanity back and wanted to visit Ginny or Ginny's grave, but no one believed he was better. And Hannah and Jeff would think he's going to go after them, but he points out Rick barely bothered to show up for him and just wants to show Mark that he'll be ready to come back home soon. As for Mark, biggest waste, because if you're going to technically have this kid talk about his shooting skills and prowess, considering he's technically Hannah's step-sibling, or was going to be, I feel like Hannah and Jeff should have ran into him hunting and he gives them advice on how to fight, especially since the gun they found wasn't loaded. Then we have Sheriff Jones. Granted, he wasn't the most useless cop in the world, especially in slasher, since he actively tried to make sure the kids were not going to be in trouble, especially since he cares about his daughter Linda, but that doesn't stop him from being a horn dog. But he doesn't let that get in the way whenever you hear something's going wrong, even investigating. You'd be surprised to hear that being a compliment when there have been a few slashers that kind of just barely even try. And even when he dies, he at least pulls off the mask, so props to him. The only problem is that he should have came up with backup, but the town is pretty small, so I'm not going to be too mad at him for that. Because compared to Carver, at least he was allowed to investigate in that one, while that one just easily killed the cop off early. How fitting that in both of those films, the black teen's parents also worked in law enforcement. For Principal Graves, I'm surprised no one considered he could have been the killer, given that it was obvious that the guy would have a reason to go after those responsible for his death. But I appreciate that he wasn't killed off at least, and they wrote him off as just being at his daughter's grave. Though I feel like he should have been at the party at least. Alright, let's talk about the accomplice first and the killer. First, we have Nancy Wallace, who was played by an older Scream Queen from before I was born. I feel like she had the best acting performance, even though I felt like it could have been just one line read here and there as a paranoid parent, but her motivation for wanting the rest of the kids dead so that Hannah wouldn't have to worry about a scholarship isn't a bad idea, because if she's the sole survivor, Hannah would either have more incentive to get a chair scholarship or be leading the team at her school, which would give her a better chance. And she did have a point to the killer in that they don't need to attack her since everyone else knew about the truth was already dead, so she's fine in that regard. Plus, she did want Hannah to stay home so that she wouldn't even have to be involved in the first place. But, you know, still planning the murder of innocent, well, okay, not innocent, but, you know, semi-remorseful teens that was just an accident. Yeah, I think that works. Rick, on the other hand, okay, He is the actor that needed the most redelivery on his lines because the motivation is sound. His son went crazy because the team's actions got said girlfriend hurt and his family name was tarnished, but instead of being sympathetic, he uses that tragedy to show his true colors, hunting humans as a fan sport, trying to frame his own son because he cares about his reputation. My issue is that I feel like the reputation part wasn't hinted at enough. In terms of characterization and filming, you could get the vibes of that because he lives with Nancy, neither of which seemed that well off. But there's not enough dialogue beats for anyone to claim that the young bloods are all seen as monsters or that his family name was tarnished. I don't have a problem with horror movies that spend the first half building up to characters, but he's the one I feel like they should have built at least something about more. Even a passing line where he speaks to Graves about wanting to make his daughter proud could have worked. Again, he's fine as an antagonist, but he could have been much better. Now for my problems and things I think they could have improved upon. Like, I'm not mad at the deaths. They're all impactful in their own way, but my problem with this movie is that too many times most of the victims could have put up a better fight instead of just letting themselves die. This does not apply to everyone, but I feel like especially with Mike, Robin, and Heather, all of them really could have either dodged or could escape their fate better. Like, Mike tripped on a branch and didn't even, hey, let me try to spin roll on the floor to dodge the Tomahawk attack. Robin could have dodged the car or had to kill her injure her foot so she didn't have the strength to try and turn away if they were going to have it that she couldn't move away from the car in time before it crashed her into the tree. And, you know, Heather could have at least tried to wrestle him with the pitchfork. Like, regarding the order of deaths, because Linda's was so anticlimactic as a killer with just a bow and arrow. Like, I feel like if you had Vicky die first, then Peter managed to escape to the house and kill him in place of Linda. Then have Linda go with Heather to get the car, and after Heather dies, Linda tries to stab him for the killer, but goes down because of the bulletproof vest. At least she would be able to say some lines before he finishes her off, because she is the most gossip and talkative of the bunch. And that's like a really good opportunity to have the gossip of the character die with a attack to the mouth. Speaking of which, I feel like if every person tried to fight Rick better, by the time he stabs Nancy and the final battle takes place, he'd feel more believably weakened enough to fight Jeff and be easier for Hannah to defeat at the end. But yeah, that's all my thoughts on Varsity Blood. I'd probably give it a 6 out of 10. It was more entertaining than bad, and after seeing older reviews, I ended up enjoying it a lot more than I thought I would. And it's a pretty basic slasher for anyone that wants to get into the genre. I guess I'd say it's mid, but not only is that term kind of confusing on the internet because no one can decide whether or not that's a 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, or 8 out of 10, it should really just be appropriate as middle of the road. And I feel like had they made some fixes or adjustments, this could have been a solid 7 out of 10, but at least it was entertaining. Anyway, that's all I got. Thanks for watching, and VIP for Art and Just Productions, signing off.